Yes, I know. Alrighty, there we go. Today I will be reviewing another pretty contentious installment in the Godzilla franchise. One that is not quite as hated on, or not really hated, not quite as debatable as Godzilla vs. Hedorah, but also in some ways it's more so than Godzilla vs. Hedorah. Today I'll be reviewing 1972's Godzilla vs. Gigan. Ignore this stupid ass title. So, Godzilla vs. Gigan is a very, very interesting film, both for myself and also in terms of its place in the Godzilla fandom, and also for me in terms of its production. Because this movie's original script, I recently found out, was supposed to be a much more different film. But I'll get to that when I actually get into the pros and cons of the film. So actually, speaking of which, okay. So, for myself personally, Godzilla vs. Gigan is a film that I hold very near and dear to myself. Because it was the very first Godzilla movie I ever owned on home video, DVD, VHS, or otherwise. Followed soon after by Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. This was the film that truly cemented myself as a diehard Godzilla fan. I've said this before in previous chats that I've done in the past, that as a kid, I was exposed to all three eras of Godzilla. I was exposed to Showa, Heisei, and Millennium at different periods of time, semi close to each other. And actually, hang on, let me do something. Okay, sorry, I had to close my window. So yeah. Anyway, I was, as a kid, I was also exposed to both the dark and the campy Godzilla. So I got used to both types of Godzilla, and I think Godzilla vs. Gigan may be, in my opinion, the perfect blend of campy and serious. And it stays like this pretty much for the rest of the series, though again, except for the next movie, which I'm sort of not looking forward to seeing again, I'm not going to lie. So Godzilla vs. Gigan is the one that truly cemented myself as a Godzilla fan, and it's the one that I will defend quite a bit. This is one of my absolute favorite Godzilla movies of all time. And it might just be my favorite of the Showa series. I kid you not. Sorry, I'm getting a message. Okay. Sorry. So yes, indeed. I think it might be my favorite of the whole Showa series. I'm not exactly sure about that. I have to go into that a little further, but I think for now I'm just gonna say this might be my favorite of the Showa series. As for its place in the Godzilla fandom, over the years I've seen this movie kind of go back and forth. Though a lot of the general consensus seems to say that this movie is not very good. I see this pop up on top 10 worst Godzilla movies all the time. Especially when I was younger, I would just sift through YouTube and see tons and tons and tons of top 10 Godzilla movies of all time. 6 or 7 times out of 10, I would see Godzilla vs. Gigan somewhere on those lists. And I always said to myself, why? It's not that bad. And don't get me wrong, Despite this being one of my favorite Godzilla movies, I will admit, yes, it's got some problems. I will be the first to admit that. Just like with the previous film, it does have its flaws. And also, in terms of its place in the fandom, I have seen a fair amount of people come out and say that they actually do like this movie. Probably the first um, YouTuber that came out and blatantly stated, "Yeah, I like this movie. I don't think it's that bad." Honestly, was Zazabar. And then, of course, Dan from KMR came out and said he likes this movie. So it kind of seems like people are becoming a little more open minded toward this film, which I am very glad for. And as for its production, well, again, I'll save that for when I get to the pros and cons, because this might be the first movie uh, that I'll review on my channel where I'll have a neutral point to make, because I have no issues with it, but I can't deny I would have still liked to see this become a thing. Okay, Justin, that's fine. Though you and I still need to get around to finishing the Telegian commentary. Anyway, so the plot of Godzilla versus Gigan. So after in Tomiyuki Tanaka's asshole idea or asshole eyes, um, since he thought that Yoshimitsu Banno destroyed the Godzilla franchise, which I don't agree with whatsoever, Tomiyuki Tanaka decided to bring back Jun Fukuda to direct Godzilla movies for a little while. Which I have actually no problem with. As much as I would have loved to see Godzilla versus Ghidorah 2, having Jun Fukuda back, I have no issue with whatsoever. Since Ishiro Honda, once again, he had quit Toho, I guess Jun Fukuda was like the next best thing. And I gotta say, I did not know that this movie was directed by Jun Fukuda until I saw Zazabar's review of this movie on Godzilla Palooza. And I didn't know that, but at the same time, it did and did not surprise me. Because this really doesn't feel like a Jun Fukuda movie that much. It has Jun Fukuda traits in it, that's for sure, and there's a couple moments throughout the film that do feel Jun Fukuda-ish, but for the most part, this is a pretty straightforward Godzilla movie. There's no really whacked out comedy scenes. There's no nutty characters. Um, there's really not that many Jun Fukuda traits. Though I feel like that's because this movie was co-written by both Takashi Kimura and Shinichi Sekizawa, two of the most polar opposite Godzilla writers in existence, coming together to write this film. Though I will explain Takashi Kimura's involvement when I talk about the original script. And we also have Akira technically, Akira Fukube is credited in the film as returning for doing the music. However, seeing its Wikipedia page, I also see there's another person named Kunio Mayuchi uh, doing the music as well, and I'll explain that when I get to the score. So it kind of feels like a bit of a return to form for a Godzilla movie. With Godzilla vs. Gigan. Gone are the really weird elements of Godzilla vs. Ghidorah, for the most part. Gone are the really trippy, sloppy editing. Gone is Richiro Manabe for now. Gone is the experimental stuff. We're kind of returning back to form as to what the mid-Showa series felt like, specifically with Destroy All Monsters and Invasion of the Astro Monster. Not just because this movie, once again, has King Ghidorah, but this really just does feel like a return to form. And I'm actually going to go as far to say this might be Jun Fukuda's second best Godzilla movie. His best, of course, being Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, the original. But as much as I do like Son of Godzilla and Sea Monster, I legitimately do think that this is Jun Fukuda's second best Godzilla movie. Though this is my favorite Jun Fukuda Godzilla movie, hands down. Again, close second being the original Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. Sorry, I had to fix my chain. So let's get into the plot. The plot of this movie is a lot more simple than the previous movie. Though I kind of feel like that's just a Shinichi Sekizawa trait. So I'm just gonna kind of breeze right through it so I can get to the more interesting stuff, at least in my eyes. So, giant insectoid aliens resembling big cockroaches, yeah, from a dying planet in Space Hunter Nebula M, uh, land on Earth and they plot to colonize the world for their own devious methods. In their words, reshape it to create world peace, quote unquote. This creating world peace, of course, meaning wiping out all humanity. Um, this already sounds kind of familiar, admittedly. So the aliens assume the forms of two dead humans. Fumio Sudo, played by Zan Fujita, and Kubota, played by Toshiaki Nishizawa. They become the secretary and chairman of the World Children's Land Committee, which is a big private charitable organization that intends to create a peace-themed monster theme park called World Children's Land. And the centerpiece of this, of course, being Godzilla Tower, which is a 50-meter tall tower that's made to shape and made to be shaped to look like Godzilla. The Nebula aliens plan to use the two monsters' Gigan action signal tapes that they have to wipe out human civilization, of course. Once again, featuring a movie where Ghidorah is under mind control. So manga artist Gengo Kotaka, played by Hiroshi Ishikawa, I think this is his only Godzilla movie, stumbles onto their plan after being hired as a concept artist for all the attractions at the theme park. And when Gengo and his friends, Machiko Shima and Shosaku Tokasugi, played by Tomoko Umida and Minoru Takashima, respectively, they decide to try to infiltrate Godzilla Tower and try to find Machiko's brother, Takeshi Shima, played by Kunio Mirai, who had mysteriously gone missing after joining up and started working for the World Children's Land Committee. And they just try to infiltrate the place and try to find him. And they accidentally obtain one of the action signal tapes, and they start to play it while they're at home. Godzilla and Anguirus hear the signal, and they start to realize something is amiss on planet Earth. Godzilla sends Anguirus to Tokyo to investigate. However, when he gets there, the JSDF Anguirus' intentions. Anguirus reports back to Monster Island, and Godzilla follows Anguirus back to Japan in order to save Earth from Gigan and King Ghidorah. So all this is going on. Gengo and his friends are captured by the Nebula aliens, and they tell them their plan to take over the world. And finally, Gigan and King Ghidorah arrive on Earth, and they start going on a massive rampage throughout Tokyo. And also, while this is going on, Gengo and his friends manage to escape the Godzilla Tower. And also in the meantime, they find out what the Nebula aliens sort of kind of really look like. It's actually kind of a creepy scene where you see the human forms of the aliens, but then their shadows reveal them just be giant bipedal cockroaches. It's actually kind of a creepy scene. So they escape Godzilla Tower and they get in contact with the JSDF. And they say we need to infiltrate Godzilla Tower and take these guys out. And as Godzilla, or not as Gigan and King Ghidorah are going on their rampage, Godzilla and Anguirus finally show up, and they engage, admittedly with Godzilla doing most of the fighting, with Anguirus being there only as kind of like a minor supplement. Slightly disappointing. I'll get into that when I get into the cons. But in my opinion, this final fight scene is absolutely fantastic. It's really fun. It's really well choreographed, and it's just a shit ton of fun, in my opinion. Defeating and driving off Gigan and King Ghidorah, but not before the humans infiltrate Godzilla Tower and they destroy it from the inside. The control over Gigan and Ghidorah is broken, but they still continue to fight. But like I said, they are driven off by Godzilla and Anguirus. And Godzilla and Anguirus return to the sea, head back to Monster Island as the sun rises, thus ending the film. So how about this plot? Well, it's pretty simple, and it's pretty similar to a couple of previous films that I will get into when I get into the cons. But if you just take it for what it is, it's a very well thought out, well, sort of well thought out. Not too complicated, but also not too simple. Corporate espionage / mystery / alien invasion / kaiju story. And that, in my eyes, that's all the best elements combined into one to make a very entertaining movie. Damn, my ear itches. So, with all that being said, let's get into the pros of the film. For the most part, the human cast, they're pretty fun. They're not over the top funny like typical Jun Fukuda characters. Like, this isn't the cast from Sea Monster and Son of Godzilla, that's for damn sure. They're a lot more grounded in reality. They just have some subtle touches of humor sprinkled through them, which I'll get into in a little bit. Gengo Kotaka, played by Hiroshi Ishikawa, he's a very, very likable protagonist. He's kind of like an adult geeky shut-in. So he's kind of like an adult version of Ken from he's pretty likable. He's got great facial expressions. He knows how to think on his feet, and he knows how to be a smart ass and actually make it kind of funny. Tomoko Umida as Machiko Shima, she's fairly likable, I suppose. She doesn't really have a lot of screen time. Well, she kind of does, but she doesn't. She also doesn't. It's a little hard to explain, but her dialogue consists of her just kind of repeatedly going off on, "Where's my brother? Did you see my brother? You ran into my brother. Did you see him? Did you talk to him?" Admittedly, it gets just a little stale towards the end of the movie, but when she's reunited with her brother, that ends, and I actually don't think she has much dialogue except to the very end of the movie, but she's likable. Minoru Takashima has Shosaku Takasugi, funniest character in the movie, at least in my eyes. He doesn't really do that many funny things, but the funny things to me that he does just God damn it. Okay. The couple funny things that he does have always stuck apartment, and they say, "Give me the tape back, please." Takasugi shows up behind him and seemingly is pointing a pistol in the small of his back and says, "Give me the damn tape, dude." And from fear, Gengo faints, and I'll just use this. And Takasugi is holding what looks like a pistol, but then he says, "He must have thought it was a gun." Pulling off tinfoil and revealing it was a fucking corn cob. That's always stuck with me. It cracks me up every time I see that because the look on his face, it's like a funny, and just the way that he says the line, "You must have thought it was a gun," like no shit, dude. He's fun. He's funny. He also is a fairly proactive protagonist in this movie because he also knows how to think on his feet. He's the one who comes up with the idea to sneak the three who are trapped inside Godzilla Tower. He uses a giant balloon filled with helium to take a long length of rope all the way up to Godzilla Tower so they can zip line down and get out, which is clever. It's clever, I'll admit. Um, and overall, the rest of the human cast and the villains too. I'm not really gonna say anything special about the villains. They're just your standard alien invaders. They're not that threatening, to be perfectly honest. Well, okay, in terms of their, demeanor, and their personalities, they're not that threatening, but they have a lot of firepower behind their sleeves, and they also have two giant monsters, one of which being Gigan under their control. So that's something good to say. But as I'll make a picture just said, it's just kind of just the same old stuff at this point. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's also not amazing either. It's just kind of standard. But the human characters, they're fairly fun. They're fairly likable. They're easy. They're easy to relate to, and they're not annoying. Certainly, like some characters in Sea Monster and Son of Godzilla, especially Sea Monster. So that's good. Pro number two is the decent humor. I kind of already touched upon this, but the Jun Fukuda does implement some comedy into this movie. It's very subtle and it's not shoved in your face, like especially in King Kong versus Godzilla. As I stated, the "you must have thought it was a gun" line that cracks me up. The way that Gengo interacts with his girlfriend, I think her name is Tomoko Tome. Hey, hang on, let me look her up. Yeah, I think that's her. Played by Yuriko Hoshimi, who also was famous for playing Anne in the original Ultra 7 TV series. If I ever get around to reviewing something Ultraman related, I'll get to that show. Um, she is also likable too. She's actually one of my favorite female characters in all of Showa Godzilla due to one thing. She's a martial artist. She's a black belt in karate. She uses that karate to take out the bad guys in a couple of scenes. I kind of wish there was a little more of that, but still, what we have, it's cool. She definitely comes off as a bit of a badass, which I do like. Jun Fukuda's female characters, I always thought were kind of infinitely superior to Ishiro Honda's main female characters, because while they're acted great and they have great lines, and thematically they're good, physically they just kind of fall short. I prefer Jun Fukuda's female characters because they're not afraid to fight. I mean, hell, especially look at his two female characters in Sea Monster and Son of Godzilla. Those two characters, they're knife wielding badasses who are good at stealth. Um, oh yeah, as she says in the movie, just get on your feet. Are you a man? Um, oh yeah, the humor, the way that Gengo interacts. I think she's his girlfriend. The way that Gengo interacts with Tomoko, it's very much like, they love each other, but they like to play and joke around with each other, not in a sexual way, but they like to joke around with each other. Personified in the scene where Gengo is first hired by the World Children's Land and he's creating a sketch for a monster he calls Mamagan. And Mamagan's chest is speckled white, red, and black, which is the exact resemblance here. Gengo turns around with the smug, smart-ass look on his face. And then she shoves the thing in the photo in his face, saying, "You cheeky pig." It's pretty interesting banter to see between these two, and I actually wish there was a little bit more of it focused on. But again, what we have, it's cool. And Tomoko's pretty badass, and the humor overall. While it's not like split your sides funny, I still do think it's fairly amusing. Pro number three is the score. Now, while I did say at the beginning that technically Akira Ifukube is credited as being the music composer, I have the suspicion that they just reused a lot of they completely reused old Akira Ifukube tracks, and they had somebody just take those tracks and piece them together into a score for this film. That certain someone I feel might be Kunio Miyachi, because it says here, uh, here we are. The majority of the film's soundtrack consists of recycled music from previous Toho movies, such as Frankenstein Conquers the World, King Kong Escapes, Atragon, and several other previous Godzilla movies. Ifukube, who did compose the music for those movies, receives credit in this film. In addition to all these stock tracks, several themes composed by Ifukube for the Expo 70 Mitsubishi Pavilion, they're used throughout the movie as well. And a new song called Godzilla March, sung by Susumu Ishikawa and composed by Kunio Miyachi, plays at the end of the movie, which is a good song. So, while people may say that Akira Ifukube returned to do the score for this movie, I don't believe it. I think that he was just credited because so much of this movie's music is previous Akira Ifukube scores that they just decided to give him credit. And Kunio Miyachi was just kind of the tool to string it all together. Not to say that the score for this movie isn't bad, actually, quite the opposite. It's good. It's very good. It's very, very, very fitting for the film. And it also does help that they use a lot of really epic. Sorry, my stomach itches. They use a lot of epic Akira Ifukube tracks for this movie, and it definitely makes this movie feel bigger than it is, which is great. It's very there's a lot of scenes where the music is very bombastic. It's very, especially during the final battle. I mean, you hear the classic Godzilla dun 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 theme playing. It is so cool, especially when we see Godzilla first arrive at the final battle to fight Godzilla, or not fight Godzilla, to fight Ghidorah and Gigan. He rises out of the ocean, and you hear the classic Godzilla theme, and he lifts his head up and he roars his arrival. That with that music playing, it is so awesome, and it stays awesome like that for the rest of the fight. It is so great. So, while I don't believe that Akira Ifukube actually scored this movie, Kunio Miyachi chose very good pieces of music to score this movie, so I applaud him. Let's see. One, two, three. Pro number four is the pacing. I actually think the pacing is very good in this movie. One of the most common complaints for Godzilla vs. Gigan is the fact that the movie takes a long time to get started, for the monsters to show up and start doing what they do. As a kid, I did agree with this criticism because all I cared about as a kid was just seeing Godzilla and Anguirus fight Gigan and Ghidorah, and that's all I cared about to see. But as I got older, I got more into the story of the film, and I just grew to accept the pacing. And nowadays, I can watch this movie just fine and not have any problems with the pacing whatsoever. Um, Sorry, I just found something that was a little interesting. So I have no issue with this movie's pacing. I think it's paced pitch perfect. The beginning, the first half does make sense to be a little slower because the first half is a corporate espionage film, and those usually do have a slower pace. And then the second half rolls around, then the monsters start showing up more, um, and it starts to speed up a lot more too. So I have no issue with that. I think the pacing in this movie it's pitch perfect. I'm probably the only person who will ever say that. Um, Pro number 5 is Gigan himself. Gigan is one of my all-time favorite monsters of all time. He's one of my favorite kaiju in any kaiju film ever. I absolutely love Gigan. I think he's a complete and utter badass. He has a very, very, very original badass design. And I would definitely go as far to say he might be Godzilla's third most powerful adversary. Third or fourth. He's got some competition with King Ghidorah, as much as I hate to say it. I don't like King Ghidorah, but King Ghidorah technically is powerful. But Gigan is a total fucking badass, in my opinion. I love his design. Even though I have stated I think the definitive version of Gigan is the Final Wars version, I still really do like the Showa design for Gigan. It's very original. It's very 70s, but it is also very fitting for its time. And you say what you want about this movie, but you can at least say that Gigan is a very memorable monster. I love his roar. I love his design. I love his power set. It's a little disappointing that even though the cover of the film shows that Gigan has a laser beam that he shoots, he never does use it in both this movie and the next film. When they use the Showa design in Godzilla games, he has his eye laser. But for this movie, they left it out. I can only guess because of budget constraints. But at the same time, there's a part of me that's kind of glad that they did leave it out, because if Gigan had his eye laser, I feel like they would have relied a little more on beam spamming. And that's pretty much all that King Ghidorah does in this movie, so it would have gotten stale if we had two beam spammer kaiju. Even though I think it has been established that Gigan is a close quarters melee combatant, so they could have just used Gigan to have his eye laser only as a supplementary tool, but still. There's a small part of me that is glad they left it out, but there's also another part of me that wishes they did. They had Gigan shoot it at least twice. That would have been cool. But still, Godzilla bleed. And this leads me into my next pro. This movie is surprisingly violent. Actually, let me fix that. I'm glad that if was still alive, he never would have allowed this. But I am very glad that Toho finally decided, yeah, we're gonna show Godzilla bleed in this movie. The first time we ever see Godzilla bleed, Gigan flies into the air and he uses his buzzsaw in his chest to fly past Godzilla. And it shocked me the first time that I saw this movie. I was like, oh my god, Godzilla can bleed. Totally blew me out of my chair. Um, Not to mention later on in the film, Godzilla after Godzilla, once Gigan is relieved of his mind control, he smacks Godzilla between the eyes quite a few times with his claw, which causes him to also bleed there too. And also, in a vain attempt to save Godzilla from being burned down by the aliens' Godzilla Tower, which I forgot to mention, it can shoot laser beams from its mouth, an obvious imitation of Godzilla's atomic breath. When Godzilla is being burned down by that, Anguirus tries to save him, but Gigan gets in his way and cuts Anguirus' face with his buzzsaw, spurting blood all over the place. And oh, this movie is surprisingly violent, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I like more violent kaiju fights, even though I have no issue with, martial artists more like fights when they're just kicking and punching and throwing each other. I have no issue with that. But when you throw in blood, I think that makes it a little more special. So that is 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. So pro number 7 is the special effects. They're great when they're new. Because this movie is also kind of infamous for using a lot of stock footage. Though I will kind of debunk that a little later when I get to the cons. Um, This is another movie that where the special effects were done by Teruyoshi Nakano, who I believe the first Godzilla movie to have Teruyoshi Nakano as a special effects guy was Godzilla versus Hedorah. At least I think it was. Let me look it up. Yeah. Teruyoshi Nakano was kind of an underling of Eiji Tsuburaya in the past, as was Sadamasa Arikawa, who did the special effects for Destroy All Monsters. And also, I think he did them for um, Space Amoeba as well. But Teruyoshi Nakano would officially take up the mantle of doing the special effects for the Showa Godzilla movies from Hedorah up until Terra Mecha Godzilla. And Teruyoshi Nakano's trademark is explosions, and this movie is full of explosions, um, which isn't a bad thing. So the special effects, yes, there's a lot of stock footage in this movie, but the the alien set that they use for their tower, it's very creative. It's very it's definitely very 70s, but it definitely does look alien and it does look high tech. I love the look of the Godzilla tower. It actually kind of looks like the design that they would later use for the Return of Godzilla from 1984. And so it looks great there. My only little minor issue with it is that they, for Godzilla's arms, they just have him with 3 claws and not 4. But that's just kind of minor. The Godzilla Tower looks great. The set for Children's Land looks great too, and it's also really fun to see it get torn to shreds in the final battle. Um, my only issue with the special effects is King Ghidorah, but I'll get to that when I get to King Ghidorah. But the Gigan suit is very well constructed. Actually, apparently, Kenpachiro Satsuma kind of had a love-hate relationship with Teruyoshi Nakano because when he was originally designing Gigan's suit, Gigan's claws were made out of pure fiberglass, and that was a pretty heavy material at the time. So Kenpachiro Satsuma apparently had a lot of difficulties moving around Gigan's arms with the original design. So I think it was Jun Fukuda himself who had to step in and say, "Hey, you can't exactly do a good job as the monster when you can't even move his arms. So you gotta change it into something else." And yes, Kenpachiro Satsuma returns from playing Hedorah as Gigan in this movie. And by the way, this would also be the last time that Hiro Nakajima would play Godzilla in the Showa series. And this is because after the death of Eiji Tsuburaya, Hiro Nakajima pretty much just lost his desire to continue with suit acting, which is understandable. I think that despite Eiji Tsuburaya being kind of a tyrant on set, most of the actually not most, many cast and crew members of early Showa era Toho considered Eiji Tsuburaya to be kind of like a father figure to them. And he was also, of course, close friends with Eiji Tsuburaya, or not Eiji Tsuburaya, Ishiro Honda. He was close friends with Tomiyuki Tanaka, close friends with Akira Fukube. Um, so after he died, the Toho in general just took a really massive hit, and it caused many people to quit, and it caused many people to just lose their desire to continue acting or just doing movies. One of which, of course, being Hiro Nakajima, as this was his last portrayal of Godzilla. Thankfully, he does go out with a bang. As I actually think, just in terms of combat and in terms of being dark, but also being kind of campy, I think this might be Hiro Nakajima's greatest performance as Godzilla since Mothra versus Godzilla 8 years prior. Now, don't get me wrong. Haruo Nakajima always did a good job as portraying Godzilla. He was really, really good in Hedorah. He was good in Destroy All Monsters. He was fairly decent in Invasion of the Astro Monster, but I really do think he is absolutely at the top of his game portraying Godzilla in this movie, at least in terms of pure combat, because most of Godzilla's screen time is just limited to him fighting other monsters. Not an issue for me because I like to see long fights and I really like a lot of action. Um, so that is great. Hiro Nakajima, even though he has unfortunately passed away, may he rest in peace. I commend him for at least giving it his all and not just kind of phoning it in for his last performance. I do admire him for that. But anyway, the special effects, they're very well done. There's a lot of explosions. There's a lot of pyrotechnics going on. The sets are well made. The costumes, for the most part, they're well made. Though, except for the Godzilla suit, which I'll get into. Actually, I'll just get into it now. This is the reason why the Godzilla suit for this movie became so infamous, because there's many scenes throughout the movie where you can clearly tell the suit was falling apart. Since I do own this movie on Blu-ray, obviously, and I watched the movie on Blu-ray, I was able to notice a lot of the flaws with the suit, specifically in the arms. There's many shots where you can see like bits of Godzilla's skin just flaking off and hanging by a thread. And in probably the most infamous scene in the movie in terms of the suit is when Godzilla regains his strength and the fight turns in his favor against Ghidorah and Gigan, where he's roaring and beating his chest and he raises his arms up in the air. You can see multiple pieces of the suit hanging by a thread off of his arms. It's really distracting and it really sticks out like a sore thumb. And that's just because this suit was put through such a hellacious beating in the previous movie, that it would make sense that it would be falling apart by this movie. So this would be the last time that this suit would ever make an appearance in a Godzilla movie. Which it's fine. Like I said, it's a good movie for this last suit to go out on. And overall, the special effects, they are pretty solid. Except for, I'm not really going to fault Teryoshi Nakano for the Godzilla suit falling apart just because it was so overused. I will fault Teryoshi Nakano for one thing, but I'll get to that when I get to the cons. 8. Pro number 8 is that the monster battles are fucking awesome. Even though there's really only one, kind of, repeating Destroy All Monsters a little bit here. There's really only one monster battle in this movie, but it's a long monster battle, and it is so goddamn entertaining. Not to mention, I think the last 40 minutes of this movie are so well paced. It's not even funny, because the last 40 minutes, it's literally nothing but action. We have Gigan and King Ghidorah going on their rampage throughout Tokyo, and that goes on for a fair amount of time. And right as it's about to feel like it's starting to get old, Godzilla and Anguirus show up, and then they proceed to their fight. And the fight itself is very well paced too. At the beginning of the and Ghidorah, they're on pretty equal terms. They both sides are getting their licks in, so it's on pretty equal grounds. Then Godzilla starts to get his ass kicked for a little while, and then Godzilla regains his strength and he starts whipping ass again. The fight once again being completely in his favor. One thing that's slightly disappointing is that Godzilla doesn't use his atomic ray very much in this film. He only uses it, I think, 4 times in this movie, so we're pulling another sea monster, where in that movie Godzilla used his atomic breath only 4 times. But that's not really much of an issue for me because it's a lot of physical combat, so it goes to show that even though Godzilla sort of prefers ranged attacks, he still is a very, very capable hand-to-hand fighter. And once again, I give a lot of credit to Hiro Nakajima for giving it his all as his performance as Godzilla. So the monster battles, they're very entertaining, they're very energetic, they're very well paced, they're quite violent, it's quite long. It's just badass in my opinion. Very entertaining. So with all of this good stuff that I have to say about Godzilla vs. Gigan, let's get into the movie's flaws. I have 4 problems with this movie, one of which being a common one. However, I'm not going to rant on it too much like most people do, but I will give mention to it. Con number one is upon this most recent rewatching, which I just got done watching this movie before I did this review, is that this movie's plot is a little too similar to both Invasion of the Astro Monster and surprisingly the Mysterians, specifically with the aliens. The aliens may as well be stand-ins for the Mysterians because their origin is pretty much the same. Well, not pretty much the same, but it is very similar, and I can't help but think they just kind of going back to the Mysterians for this one, because the origin of the Nebula aliens is that they were living on another planet, and essentially the dominant species of that planet had polluted themselves into extinction. It's kind of like what happened with the Mysterians. They had essentially blown themselves up and polluted their own planet to near extinction as well. But you can't deny that this movie definitely, in terms of its just in general alien invasion plot, it's very similar to Invasion of the Astro Monster. It doesn't really come off as a ripoff per se in my eyes. I just kind of feel like Shinichi Sekizawa and Takashi Kimura, because this movie it was so rushed. This movie had an even lower budget than Godzilla vs. Ghidorah, allegedly. This is obvious with this movie's original script, which I'll get into in a little bit. I just kind of feel like because they were kind of rushed for this movie, they had to draw elements from the previous work. So, in that sense, I kind of really can't blame them, but it still is a problem nonetheless. Con number two actually is Anguirus. Now, Anguirus I really do like. His suit is fine. It's well constructed. Though apparently the only reason that they had Anguirus join this movie was because they had a perfectly good Anguirus suit that was left behind from Destroy All Monsters that wasn't being used. So Toho just said, we're going to have Anguirus in this movie. We have this suit here. We haven't used it in a couple of years. Let's bring him in. And not to mention, we haven't seen Anguirus since Destroy All Monsters. So it is nice to see him return. My issue with Anguirus is just kind of spends the most of the movie getting his ass kicked. And I hate to say that because I love Anguirus. He's one of my favorite Godzilla monsters. And I think he's one of the top 10 most underrated Godzilla movies of all time. Godzilla monsters of all time. Hell, I love Godzilla Raids Again. I like him in that. He's good in Destroy All Monsters. And I actually prefer Anguirus as Godzilla's best friend to Rodan. Though definitely Rodan and Anguirus are certainly tied as Godzilla's two best friends. But I do like Anguirus, but my issue with him is that he gets his ass kicked way too much in this movie. I will give him some credit toward the end of the movie that he tries to fight by throwing himself backwards and using his spiky carapace to smash into King Ghidorah and cause him great pain, which I do like. But aside from that, I mean, he gets his face cut up by Gigan. He gets the shit beat out of him by both Gigan and King Ghidorah. Disappointing to see Anguirus get his ass kicked for most of this movie, and just leave Godzilla to do all the fighting. Though thankfully Godzilla does kick a lot of ass. So yeah, I wish that Anguirus was a little better executed in this movie. I wish his combat was a little better than it is in this movie. I mean, like I said, the scenes where he does try to fight, they're not bad. There's just not enough of it, and it's just kind of a case of too little, too late. Con number 4 is, yes, of course, the stock footage. Though, like I said, I'm not going to rant on this issue nearly as much as most people do because there's actually not that much stock footage as most people think that there is in this movie. I timed it. I shit you not, I actually did time it. There, in an 89-minute long movie, there is only 7 minutes and 23 minutes of stock footage in this movie, which kind of surprised me. I just remember seeing a lot of clips of stock footage when I was a kid, and it always kind of felt like there was at least 10 to 12 minutes, but surprisingly, no. 7 minutes and 23 seconds of stock footage. That's nowhere near as bad as something like, say, Gamera Super Monster, where there's a legit half hour of stock footage in the film. and also Gamma versus Virus, which has a nearly 20-minute long block of stock footage. And also, yes, the fight between Anguirus and King Ghidorah, it pretty much is all stock footage from Destroy All Monsters. Again, that's disappointing. But I'll get to that in a minute. So yeah, the stock footage, mainly my issue with the stock footage is everything that has to do with, no, not everything, but 80% of King Ghidorah in this movie is stock footage. And that leads me into my biggest problem with this movie, but I will finish up on the stock footage is I don't think the stock footage is nearly as bad as everyone thinks that it is if it's used for destruction clips as a supplementary tool for the destruction scenes between Gigan and Ghidorah. But that also leads me into Ghidorah. But still, the stock footage, yes, it's distracting, especially when the film grain um, they try to do a day for night thing with the stock footage because most of the stock footage takes place during the actually no all the stock footage that they use in this movie takes place during the day, and a great majority of this movie takes place at night. So they try to do like a day for night filter on the footage to make it look like night. It sticks out like a sore thumb, and really just comes off as being a little lazy. But because this movie had a low budget and because this movie was kind of rushed, I can't necessarily blame it, but it still is a bit of an issue nonetheless. And that leads me into the biggest problem that I have with this movie, and that is motherfucking King Ghidorah. I so badly wish that King Ghidorah was a different monster in this movie. Or they went with the original, they more went with the original script. And I'll get into that right now. An early draft of the movie was written in 1971 by Takashi Kimura, at this point under his pseudonym Kaoru Mabuchi, which is a pretty androgynous name. It was titled Godzilla vs. the Space Monsters Earth Defense Order, which involved an alien called Miko resembling a giant brain intending to conquer the Earth using King Ghidorah, Gigan, and Megalon, who of course would be later on be reworked into the next movie. And Godzilla and Anguirus show up in Tokyo in defense of the Earth, and Miko uses these three monsters to install his being into a giant statue called Majin Tuol, which is a fictional Inca god, which is pretty much Toho's version of Daimajin, which has been erected at Tokyo Science Land. Gigan uses his buzzsaw cutter to cut through the statue, causing it to bleed somehow. And Majin Tuol becomes alive, and he allies himself with Godzilla and Anguirus, and they proceed to defeat the space creatures, and Godzilla destroys Miko. And after the battle, Majin Tuol again turns to stone, leading into the next movie. That script, and I just covered the neutral point, that script, can't deny, that sounds really awesome. That would have it would have been a little strange, yes, but can't deny it would have been awesome. It would have been really fucking cool. However, Shinichi Sekizawa drafted a second draft of the movie using many of Sekizawa's ideas, or not Sekizawa, Kimura's ideas, and Sekizawa's pitch was titled The Return of King Ghidorah, which, well, but the only reason that I can give you as to why they didn't go with that is because of budget constraints. So they dropped Megalon, they saved him for the next movie, they dropped Rodan and Varan and replaced him with Anguirus, and thus Godzilla vs. Gigan was born. Can't deny that those original scripts would have made for better Godzilla movies. Well, not saying that this movie is bad, but they would have been made for really good Godzilla movies. And again, if Toho ever sees this, can you please pick up these two scripts and make them into actual movies? Because, come on, these scripts are cool. Give us a break, please. Let us see something new. So yes, Ghidorah. I don't like King Ghidorah in this movie. He feels completely shoehorned. 80% of Ghidorah's screen time in this movie is stock footage from Ghidra, Invasion, and Destroy All Monsters. And the new King Ghidorah suit that they use looks like garbage. It looks It looks really stiff. It looks like it wasn't made very well. It looks like it was just they were doing the bare minimum of wire work to make it look like it was semi-alive. The gravity beam effects that they use for the new King Ghidorah suit, they're kind of lazy. Um, just King Ghidorah in this movie feels so fucking shoehorned. It's not even funny. I so desperately wish that they either A went with more of these original scripts and used more original footage for Ghidorah, or B they just used a different monster for Gigan to be partnered up with. Because Ghidorah's current state in this movie, I think, is utter crap. And they should have tried to use the same suit, yes. Because despite its flaws, it's one of my favorite kaiju movies of all time, despite its flaws. And I think it's one of the most underrated Godzilla movies ever made. Not quite as underrated as Godzilla versus Hedorah, but pretty damn close. So, with my original score being an 8.5 out of 10, like with Hedorah, I'm going to bump it up to a 9 out of 10. I think this is a very solid movie. Though I can understand why some people don't like this movie because it does have some problems. A 9 out of 10 for me is my official score. I highly recommend this movie. If you're a fan of 70s Godzilla movies and you haven't seen this one, how the fuck are you a 70s Godzilla fan and not see this movie? It's one of the most common ones available. Well, at least now it is. For a while it wasn't, but thank you once again, Kraken, for releasing this movie. Post your comments down below. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share this video with your friends. Join me tomorrow as I review a vastly inferior film that's gone on to become a cult classic to some people and go on to become one of the worst Godzilla movies ever made. Even more so than this movie. When I review 1973's Godzilla vs. Megalon. So go out and hire a manga artist and team up with him to take out some alien Godzilla towers so Godzilla can defeat two invading alien monsters. And I will see you guys in the next review.